I think we can all agree that GPU prices are quite high. Honestly, Nvidia's top models have always been expensive, but hardly ever like now. Conversely, even AMD seems to be getting a little more pricey. So that's quite the drip over here, 2 or more kidneys worth. And in this context, gaming laptops that many hardcore desktop purists dislike seem to be now the most affordable solution to get their hands on a top GPU at a competitive price, even if that GPU is not really desktop. Understandable, since we are talking about chips with lower power consumption. But the gaming laptop species remains an extremely interesting one, because this is where the manufacturer's craftsmanship shows. It's not easy to cram top-end components like Intel Core i9 CPUs and GPUs like Nvidia's 4000 series graphic cards into a chassis that's small enough to fit easily into a backpack. You have to balance things like temperature, performance, and portability so that the final product is both practical and fast. And one such laptop is this ROG Zephyrus M16, the maker's latest attempt to convince those PC fanatics that a portable is powerful enough. Mission accomplished? Well, stick with me on this video and let's find out. And I'll start straight away with the main purpose of this laptop: gaming. But before we go through benchmarks and results, let's first see what hides in this thin and light chassis. And it's pure madness. An Intel Core i9 13900H coupled with an RTX 4090 as the frame shredder for gaming. This beefy configuration is backed by 32GB DDR5 RAM at 4800 MHz and a fast 2TB SSD. So it's clear from the get-go that this laptop means solid gaming at the highest details, which is to be expected considering the price, which I'll tell you about later. We don't want to spoil the party, don't we? Until then, let's run through some tests from some games. And I chose to kick it off with Cyberpunk 2077, a poorly optimized game at launch, which still remains a title that wears down almost any configuration on the market, if you crank the settings up to 11. Oh yeah, and I chose to do all my testing at the native screen resolution of 2560 by 1600 pixels. So with everything on max and no ray tracing, I got 63 FPS, which is definitely playable. With all effects switched on and DLSS set to balanced, I got 55. And frame generation came in to save the day, so I got 84 FPS on Ultra with ray tracing. Now, that's not bad at all. Next, Shadow of the Tomb Raider scored a very nice 118 FPS with ray tracing and DLSS running. Then I took a lap in Forza Horizon 5, a very well optimized title, and it shows in the results. With absolutely all settings maxed out, I got 77 FPS at native resolution without DLSS. Need I also say that it looks absolutely fabulous? Moving on, I ran a few benchmarks from the 3D Mark suit, where the ROG Zephyrus M16 did very good. In the Speedway test, we scored nearly 4000 points. In Port Royal, we scored over 5800, and in TimeSpy over 14,000. These results bring it extremely close to a desktop RTX 4070 GPU, which is not bad at all for a laptop. In superposition, the situation holds nicely, and the 11,200 points is a respectable result. So, after putting the RTX 4090 on the Zephyrus M16 through trials of fire, I turned my attention to the CPU as well. So it is that in Cinebench R23, our Core i9 13900H scored nearly 2000 points in single core, which brings it extremely close to the desktop K version. We've actually come across this CPU before, and it never ceases to blow minds, although the situation changes a bit in the multi-core test, where the 13900H scored 18,471 points, so noticeably less than its desktop brother. The difference is made by the lower TDP. We're talking about 115 watts versus the 275 watts drawn by the 13900K. However, I have to note that the cooling coped decently, and although the CPU throttled, reaching 105 degrees, the frequency easily climbed up to 5.4 GHz, the figure Intel promises for this model. And that brings me straight to the cooling system, which is something truly special. 3 fans provide airflow into a thin chassis of just 2 centimeters, and the huge heatsink takes up a good chunk of the top of the laptop. For the CPU, the folks at ROG chose to use liquid metal instead of the usual thermal paste. In addition, I also noticed that the Zephyrus M16 is quite quiet, even when I ran heavy benchmarks and games. A pair of headphones in the mix and noise is no longer an issue. And this laptop really puts out the heat. Through all our tests, although the processor reached that fateful 105 degrees, it settled down to around 95 after a short while. The frequencies dropped a bit too, but that's normal and to be expected from such a beefy engine. The GPU, however, did much better. The cooling system managed to keep an RTX 4090 with a TDP of 145 watts under control, and temperatures didn't exceed 80 degrees, so we dodged the throttle gracefully. However, there is something that bugs me when it comes to cooling. The exhaust slots for the hot air are located right in front of the display. This means that over time there is a chance that all that hot air coming out from the cooling system will damage the screen. Even if ROG says this is not a problem, allow me to remain skeptical. How on earth can nothing happen when hours a day, weeks, months or years, dozens of degrees are constantly blasting the bottom of the screen? Anyway, but what good is such a magnificent setup if you don't have a screen to match? Well, you do. We're talking about one of the coolest 16-inch screens on any gaming laptop. A 10-bit mini LED clocked at 240 Hz and with a 3 milliseconds response time, very narrow bezels and a maximum brightness of 1100 nits when HDR mode is enabled. On the narrow top side, we also have a good webcam at 1080p and with support for facial unlock via Windows Hello. The screen surface is matte, which helps combat reflections, hallelujah, even if this treatment makes viewing angles a little less extreme. You don't pay a truckload of money for a laptop to stare at it from the side. The colors are very well calibrated and the ROG folks boast 100% DCI-P3 spectrum coverage and Pantone certification, and I can see why they brag about it. Even though we're looking at a laptop dedicated to gaming, this beautiful screen makes it usable for professional tasks like photo and video editing. The black, while shallower than on an OLED panel, seems to me above any IPS on the market, and the contrast is also very good. Of course, standards like Dolby Vision, G-Sync and HDR are supported in full. To make it even more fitting for productivity as well, behold the 16:10 aspect ratio. This standard is starting to be adopted by gaming device makers too, and rightly so. When you also need to work on it and not just play games, the extra space helps. But I saved the best for last, and that's the most funky and flashy thing on this laptop right here. If the screen is really cool, wait until you see the anime matrix system on the back. Basically, on half of the lid, ROG have put tiny LEDs that, with the help of Armoury Crate software, can display all sorts of animations, text or even little games. We had so much fun with it, fooling around like kids with a slots-like mini-game we stumbled across in the menus. So if you've spent all your money on this laptop and don't have any left over to go to the casino, the Zephyrus M16 has you covered. This anime matrix is also the solution chosen by ROG to set their lineup apart. If you want something like this on your laptop, you should buy a Zephyrus model. If you don't care about that, you can go for a Strix. But if you did that, you'd give up one of the funniest conversation starters I've seen on any laptop. And speaking of the lid, let's quickly talk about the build. Although the lid flares a bit when you pull it harder due to the chosen construction solution with the hinges on the edges, I like that it doesn't flap or put on that anxiety-inducing clickety-clack. In terms of durability, the keyboard area fares well as well. I pressed soundly on the key area, and even though I felt the chassis flex a bit, I didn't run into any problems in everyday use. And while we're here, let's also talk a bit about the keyboard itself, which I actually liked. The keystroke isn't too long, which might bother some gamers used to the red mechanical switches, but every press was as sharp and responsive as possible. The touchpad was another pleasant surprise. The surface is large and well distinct from the rest of the chassis, which is a plus you feel when using the laptop in the dark. It also supports multi-touch, and all the inputs I gave it did register well. The port choice is another area where the Zephyrus M16 is bulletproof. On the left side, we have a Thunderbolt 4, a USB 3.2 Type-A, an HDMI 2.1 and a combo jack. On the right, we have a USB-C 3.2, an additional Type-A port and a microSD card reader. Unlike the last generation, we lost the Ethernet port, but that can be fixed with an adapter. Sound is another perk of this laptop. The 6 speakers are loud and strong and have decent sound quality. The bass is somewhat absent, but I've heard worse. Anyway, on the sound side, the M16 does well with music, and in games it sits just as well. The 90 Wh battery is great and provides about 10 hours of video playback at 1080p. In the PCMark Work 10 test, the M16 manages somewhere around 7 hours, so just under a full work schedule. And that's with Windows battery saver settings on balanced. If you happen to run out of battery when working on it or watching movies, the 240 watts charger in the box pumps the battery up to 50% in half an hour. As for the price, the aggregators list the model at around $3,500, which is quite expensive. On the other hand, it's unquestionably the king of the hill regarding performance and features, and that's in a notably smaller chassis than the beastly Strix Scar 18, with which it shares the CPU and GPU. Plus, the interesting lid design is simply the cherry on top. The M16 doesn't hit the Scar's scores still, for size and power consumption reasons. If the Scar's RTX 4090 draws 175 watts, the Zephyrus M16 is more accommodating at just 145. But I say, as long as you don't care about dry numbers and just want to play and work in good conditions, you won't feel the difference. The only thing I still dislike is the hot air exhaust hitting the screen. But that's certainly not a deal breaker either. All the extra features, like the good speaker system, Windows Hello camera and the good battery, make the Zephyrus M16 an extremely appealing offering for a picky gamer with a limited backpack space. As for its actual performance in games and in testing, I think the results speak for themselves. And now let me know in the comments section how you like it. Is it a good investment? How do you like the gimmick with these 8-bit animations on the laptop lid? I personally love this gizmo. And now, to be or not to be, worth that fistful of dollars? This is the question. Given the current prices of high-end components, do you think this laptop can replace a high-performance desktop system? I'm looking forward to your answers in the comments, and while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification buttons to stay updated on the latest hardware. Cheers and happy gaming!